Hello, it's time for me to read some stories from the Great Depression. This one is titled, You Took the Good with the Bad. Few farms in the rural areas of Minnesota had electricity in the early 30s, and ours was one of the no-haves, remembers P.A. Kitchie, now of Minneapolis, Minnesota. We had a radio, although the batteries were low or dead most of the time. As a result, we went to the neighbors to hear the Joe Louis fights. We all sat around the radio looking at the speaker, visualizing the action of the fights. We seemed to get a better picture of the action through our imagination than we do today with the finest of TVs. After the fights, someone would pop a large bread rising pan heaping full of popcorn. The corn was popped in the big old iron all-purpose skillet every household had. Pure home-rendered lard was used and no salt was added. It was dumped on the oilcloth-covered farm table with everyone sitting around enjoying the treat and the lively banter that ensued. We enjoyed these evenings immensely. One morning in July, my parents awoke at 2 a.m. to a very bright light outside all over the yard. Perhaps there was a combustion sound that might have awakened them, and seeing the yard lit up like high noon was alarming. The barn was burning. The hay mow of the big red cattle barn was a huge inferno. We were called downstairs and instructed to run to the neighbors, one in each direction a mile away, to call the fire department. There were no private numbers on those old phones. Codes were used, and when a number was called, and especially when it was the fire department number, and at 2 a.m., everyone jumped out of bed to hear what it was. Sometimes it was a house with kids upstairs. This was a barn with cattle in the pasture, but people still came, partly out of curiosity and partly to help, which they tried to do. Cars kept coming until it looked like a big summer auction, parking far out on the road to stay away from the sky full of flying timber sparks. The fire department concentrated on saving the house and preventing the sparks from igniting it. There was nothing they could do for the barn. It burned to the ground. The cows came home on their own that morning, looked around, and some even tried to go to the exit of the barn door to get in for milking. Our barn was insured for $1,500, but the insurance company said because of the years of depreciation, they could only pay half of that. The barn had been in excellent condition. The entire community came to help get the barn replaced. They each worked a day free and for $1 an hour after that. They worked hard and fast and had the barn up in no time. The foreman, however, was paid more money. He got $1.35 an hour straight through. My parents gave an appreciation dance in our huge kitchen. 2 local people came to play, and Mother had lots of lunch and coffee. It was prohibition, but there were bootleggers outside, and that was written by P.A. Kitchie. This one is called The Lone Wolf Trader. There is a lone wolf picture in our family which we all admire more than if it had been a Rembrandt or a Gough masterpiece. In the 1930s, nothing new ever came our way. For so many years, we had all forgotten that there were beautiful things out there, albeit far out of our reach. We never went to town just to look around or to window shop. It was frivolous to expect anything. But one day we were surprised when an old beat-up Ford truck with its high sideboards on its box came clattering down our driveway, and a tattooed old man got out. He explained that he was buying junk copper and brass from cast-off old items that one might have lying around. When asked what it might be worth to him, he said he bought by the pound, and since he had no cash either, he gave a beautiful picture of her choice to the lady of the house. My father was delighted with the prospect of arranging a gift for my mother so easily. Nothing had come easy for so long, and certainly nothing to beautify the home with. My father was impressed with the man's effort in making a living practically by begging people for their junk. He took him around the farm behind the machine sheds and barns, out in the family dump where he found a considerable amount of good brass and copper pieces of all kinds. At one time, these metals were used extensively and exclusively for certain parts of machinery, buggies, and surreys, so the dumps and trash piles which every farm had was full of them. The man took his time searching and declined a cup of coffee that my mother offered. When he was satisfied that he had looked the farm over sufficiently and his truck was nicely filled, he invited my mother to come out and choose the picture she liked best for her wall. Mother studied the pictures carefully and liked them all so well she had difficulty selecting, but finally chose the lone wolf picture she saw my father admiring. We all loved it and considered it a gift from the poor, kind old man. The picture is still in our family possession and is cherished for the memories it holds. Each day it becomes more valuable as an antique, but it is stored with our family memoirs. I was a child at the time, and I remember being impressed by the old gentleman. He was working at making a living with discarded old junk and wasn't too proud to dig in the dirt for his livelihood. This memory stayed with me. Later we heard the market for brass and copper was going up, and this was an ominous sign of impending war in the not-too-distant future. Decades later, when time allowed, I found myself in the business of buying old stuff and reselling it, just like the tattered man had years ago. It was a good, fulfilling feeling. A yearning had come full circle. I called our business the Ideal Junk Shop and operated it for many years out of a recycled old school building called the Ideal School. And this was by R.V. from Menominee, Wisconsin. I know I butchered that one. And I apologize to anybody from Wisconsin. Okay, sharing the coal. We often talk about how neighborly and helpful people were during the Depression, how they pulled together, writes Beulah Tufton of Wolf Point, Montana. And this attitude hung on even after times got better. This was never demonstrated better than when a great blizzard hit Plentywood, Montana. Shortly after the storm hit, which was in late March, the local drayman, Elmer Gooder, pulled into town with a truckload of coal. It was destined for some place or other, but he wasn't foolish enough to try to keep going. He tied up at the Lincoln Lumber Company, where my dad worked then. The storm continued to rage and the temperatures kept going down. Elmer began to wonder if people had enough coal to last them through the storm, since it was late spring and lots of people let their coal supply dwindle in anticipation of spring and summer. There were too many places to use the money to allow buying 6 months ahead. Elmer called on volunteers to sack his coal and haul it on foot and sleds from house to house where they were running out, pulling the sleds through blinding snow and cold, giving it to them for free. On the third day, they ranged further out and came upon a little house occupied by an elderly, retired school teacher. There was no response to their knock on the door, so they walked right in. No doors were ever locked. They found her sitting in front of her kitchen range, which had the barest little fire in it, wrapped in blankets with her feet in the oven. She started to cry, excuse me, when the two snow-covered men burst into her kitchen. She was almost out of coal, and when the storm hit, had burned about everything in the house that would burn. She was prepared to die. There was nothing else to burn. The two men got the stove going, made her some coffee, and warmed up the soup she had on hand. They also left her an extra sack of coal before they were on their way to check on others. I cannot imagine what that must have been like to be that poor woman. Okay, earthquakes were minor inconveniences. The year was 1935 or 36 when we had a minor earthquake in our capital city of Helena, Montana. My dad worked for the marvelous old man Fredham, hauling produce from the Spokane area. Dad and Mr. Fredham got to Helena in the evening of the earthquake, and they were going to spend the night there. Dad refused to check into the hotel, so he slept in the truck. Mr. F., who was never afraid of anything, checked into this little hotel that had the whole front wall missing, leaving these rooms open to view. Dad had said he didn't get much sleep. Every little aftershock woke him up and scared him to death. Mr. F, on the other hand, had a really good night's sleep. Today, that hotel would be condemned because of the damage, but yesterday was a totally different time, and if things were usable, they were used. Except for the missing front wall, the hotel was in good shape. Of course, everything built then was sturdier than it is now. This was by Beulah Tufton, also from Wolf Point, Montana. Living in a large city in the 30s had its advantages. You didn't have to be very old to earn money working, and if you were a hustler, you could sell newspapers. Of course, you handed all your earnings over to a parent who would always give you a nickel or so for your pocket money. A young lad in the city loved to have coin in his pocket, and it provided a first-class lesson in learning how to handle funds. Even small earnings went quite a long way in San Francisco, where a boy could swim all day for a nickel. For free if you could surf fish from the Embarcadero all the way to Flyshacker's Pool, and there was a community hall where kids could learn to do crafts in the evening. There was always a choice of things to do in the city, but you had to work for your money. Children learned that lesson very young. By F.R. in Cornell, Wisconsin. Excuse my little mistakes here and there. I'm just going to read a couple more and then we'll be done for today. They didn't give up. Every effort was made to keep on doing business as usual. In spite of the severe shortages, many places kept their doors open by devising a way to help their customers. There was nothing else out there for them, so they struggled on, all the while praying for better times. Creameries would furnish feed for the livestock, butter, cheese, and other dire needs as a draw against the cream checks. Oftentimes the customer owed the creamery at the end of the month, but they worked it out on the next check. The meat market kept afloat by going to farms to kill and dress out their livestock and take it back to the market to cut up and use for store sales. The farmer could draw beef against the animal that was picked up. The butcher took his income out of a percentage of that meat. It says competition was keen. It took initiative and stamina and an urgent yearning to get out from under to keep from failing in any new business. Most of the old had folded or were barely hanging on. To survive in the economy of the 1930s, you had to have something needed by many, and you had to know something about marketing. But the public was hard to change. Money was too hard to come by for anyone to venture into the unknown and try something new. Since you couldn't gamble with $1, you stayed with the old and tried and true. It was safer that way. In starting a new business, you soon learned that there were obstacles you hadn't known anything about. For starters, there was the everlasting shortage of cash, and the banks didn't help much. Since Black Friday, they were usually cautious of failed loans, and no one blamed them. People weren't buying much of anything, and definitely not something they knew little about. Too many were trying to sell something, and few bought. You had to have something good, and you had to have the expertise to let customers know about it. It took witty new ideas, an innovative, enterprising approach, and a number of failures to learn from for a chance at success. Few succeeded, but the Odell family of Minneapolis, Minnesota, knew they had a product better than any thus far. Together they had the persistence to surmount the setbacks and the failures and to keep going. They combined their ideas and efforts, and through trial and error and very hard work, they succeeded in eventually making an enormously successful business out of shaving soap. They called their company the Burma Vita Co. Company, and their product was Burma Shave. The usual method of shaving had been the mug with its round-fitted soap and brush. The company had to find a way to not only perfect a lather cream that did a better job of softening stiff whiskers in order to get a closer shave, but also to convince a cautious public to try it. There were a lot of gimmicks being used that were a waste of money. Advertising was difficult because people weren't buying a lot of newspapers or magazines, and radio advertising was in its infancy and yet not yet proven to be worthwhile. A young son of the family, an entrepreneur like his father, came up with the idea of trying a series of highway signs to make their product known. The group discussed it and then decided on how best to do it. They came up with using a number of clever, catchy verse printed on bright colors on signs a number of feet apart so they could easily be read while driving the speed of cars that day. The first trial series did bring in business, so they expanded. With each new series of signs in new areas, the business grew noticeably. They were on their way. To get new fresh verses, they held a contest giving $100 for each verse sent in that was selected to use. Hundreds of thousands came in, all vying for the big money. So many, in fact, that an office had to be established and people employed to make wise selections for the signs springing up all over the nation. Fearing the highway department might frown on the distraction to the drivers, they quickly took advantage of the situation and made a priority of putting up signs that encouraged good driving habits. The highway department loved it because it also carried their safety message. And here's just a few of those, and I know you guys remember seeing them all along the highways in times past, and I've read about them, so here we go. Remember this, if you'd be spared. Trains don't whistle because they're scared. Burma Shave. Okay, trains don't whistle because they're scared. That's a nice little safety sign. They missed the turn, car was whizzin', fault was hern, funeral his'n. Burma Shave. Is he lonely or just blind? This guy who drives so close behind? Burma Shave. He lit a match to check his gas tank. That's why they call him Skinless Frank. Burma Shave. Don't take a curve at 60 per. We hate to lose a customer. Burma Shave. The public loved the light-hearted, flirty verses, and the masculine shaving signs made Dad and Big Brother feel good about themselves. It created a nice feeling, and it seemed to lighten the load. It was something to smile about. President Roosevelt had said, "Smile, smile, smile. It'll get better." The Burma Shave people gave this country something to smile about. Burma Shave was on its way when the war broke out, and the government issued a can in every military man's first aid kit. Sprayed on a wound, it eased the pain and the burn of phosphorus from grenades and bombs for the men while they were in heavy fighting. Okay, there is a lot more that we could read, but I'll save that for another time. Thanks for joining me, and I'll see you next time.